Something people learning piano can find difficult to start with is changing chords and flowing through a chord progression. I want to give you 3 simple steps that work to get better at this, improve your technique, show you where you can go wrong, and help make playing chords feel easier. The 3 steps really need to all come together, so make sure to check them all out, and there's also some extra tips at the end of the video. Now, before you jump straight in and try and string a chain of chords together, you must be really confident at recognizing each individual chord position without hesitating. And you need to know exactly how you're going to land on each one. So there's 2 things to pay attention to there. That's your fingers and your hand placement. First, you must make sure there's a logic to the fingers you've chosen. And we need to use fingers that are going to help make it easier to move from chord to chord when you get to that point. Usually we don't want to jump around every chord with the same fingers. It helps us to flow smoothly when we have some variety, so we can sometimes switch fingers as we move. For example, I might play this chord with 1, 3, 5, move to the next chord with 1, 3, 5 because I'm going to keep the middle note the same, and then switch to 1, 2, and 4. That kept my thumb on the bottom. So but the real key is that you then make sure you rehearse each chord sticking to those fingers, because that way you build a habit that becomes automatic and needs less thought. If you keep changing fingers, or maybe you don't even realize you're changing fingers, you're rehearsing different things and you'll end up hesitating over what to use, and that's going to ruin your flow when you come to try and move through lots of chords. Now, to help those fingers get in place more easily, pay lots of attention to your hand placement. So essentially just spend a bit of time on each chord to find that sweet spot where it feels most comfortable to play it. When chords have a mixture of black and white keys, you want to play a little deeper in the keyboard to get a better landing. But if my thumb needs to be on a black key though, I need to go in quite a bit deeper so I can play the chord comfortably without having to over twist my wrist. You can see how my hand moves in and out to play through these chords. Here's where I want to make a really important point. When you're playing chords, picture the whole shape, all the notes in one go, so you can get your hand over the top in the right position before coming down. Otherwise it leads to coming in at weird angles and weird hand positions, and it all feels awkward. And of course you need to have your basic chord playing technique in place, which I went over in depth in my last video. There's a link for that below. The short version is we need to make sure we've got a nice hand position with slightly curved fingers, our arm is up over the top of the keys, and we need to use our arm to help our fingers bring a chord down. Just quickly, if anything in this video is helpful for you, then it's really helpful for the channel if you could click the like button. Thank you. The fingers and the hand positions need to be a complete routine. So the step to take is some out of time practice. Play through each chord, but take as long as you need. Whilst you're holding this chord, eye up the next one, think about the fingers and the hand position, and whenever you're ready, lift up and move. That way we make sure we get everything right and we get in a quality practice. The next steps will get more into how we can move better. Repetition is key, so repeat this about 5 or 6 times, or more if you need, until it feels confident. And if there's 6 chords, for example, you can build up to doing all 6. So you could just do 2 or 3, and then do it with 4 chords and then 5. And if it's something much longer, you can also break it up into sections. Step 2 is a really crucial step. As you're moving around from chord to chord, you need to make sure that you're taking the most direct, efficient path to really get on top of the next landing spot. But to do that, we have to be thinking ahead. And it's really important that we practice in the right way so we can keep up mentally with the sequence. It's actually really hard to play relaxed and implement good technique until you're confident with what you're meant to play and can think quick enough. Let's say the first chord is here, it's an F major, and the next chord is here. Well, here's what can go wrong. You play the first chord, but then you wait until the last second to think about the next chord, which means you end up hesitating about where to go. Maybe you move in the wrong direction or you move your hand too far, but likely you end up making some kind of unsure, jerky, stabby movement to get the next chord. And that's because you haven't thought quick enough or early enough about where to go next, and that leads to mistakes and bad rhythm. So as soon as you land on a chord, start thinking about the next one. That way you've got the most amount of time possible, so you're already ready in your head when the time actually comes to move. And remember to look for the most direct path from chord to chord. So on this F, my hand needed to be further back, but on the C minor, my hand needed to be further forward. So don't make the common mistake of, from the F, going along sideways and then forward. You need to make a movement in that direction, like that, instead of across and forward. So you're taking a B line over the top of the keys, like that. You have to be confident where you're headed next to leave the previous chord in a good direction. But how do we practice to think quick enough in the moment? Well, after step one, we then have to practice in time, but slowly first. Going slow gives us that extra thinking time. When it starts to feel natural and comfortable, then we can gradually speed it up. And that builds us up to think faster about everything we need to play and how we're playing it. But just make sure that you don't speed it up before everything feels really clear and you're not hesitating. Being unsure causes us to tense up and stops us playing fluidly, which is why that's such an important step. Again, practice this 5 or 6 times before speeding it up, and sometimes I like to challenge myself and say I've got to get 3 right in a row before I can move on. And if there's any particular moments that feel more difficult, just practice that chord change more. Step 3 really is the secret sauce here, and it's a simple thing to do with our technique as we lift up and move. A mistake that people make is what I sometimes call planing, when they're moving their hand around to change chord on the same plane like this without lifting, and that's not good. It ends up looking very awkward to play things like this. Sometimes you end up kind of stabbing sideways a bit, which doesn't release keys properly, it's inaccurate, it's awkward, and it can sound a bit messy. When letting go of one chord, we must feel our arm in control of the lift, in control of the height of your arm, so all the keys release and pop back up. Then we really need to be lifting up and over to get on top of the next chord you're aiming for. So it should look more something like this. When your arm is in control, we're a lot more free to move around whilst keeping our hand and fingers relaxed. I actually recommend doing this as a warm-up as well as this, just jumping your hand around different positions like that, getting used to the feel of the lift, just getting the feel of this for yourself. You're aiming to keep your wrist joint loose and relaxed like we went over in the last playing chords video. But the other big problem here is that after playing a chord, people tend to keep their hand engaged and rigid, locked in the shape of that chord that they were just on as they try and lift and move to the next one. But that makes it very difficult to reshape our hand into the new chord position. So basically, as we lift one chord, in that moment, we must allow our hand to relax and just go back to its natural state so we can reshape it and release the tension. Don't overthink this. It's just as you lift, you just let your hand stop trying to hold the chord shape. It does take a bit of practice to develop this habit every time you lift and move, but it also helps when you're not forcing down the chord in the first place. And remember, when you actually play a chord, don't dig your weight in, don't lean your weight on the keys, don't keep pushing with your fingers, because all of that makes it feel like your hand gets stuck in this chord and makes it harder to lift and move. It's kind of like you're trying to lift something whilst you're also leaning weight on it at the same time. Let's put this together and sum it up simply. Play a chord, remember don't dig in. Lift up, so now your arm is in control. There's no weight leaning on the piano. Then you relax your hand, and as you do that, you move and remold into the new chord. Of course, your hand slightly engages as you come to the new chord. Lift up, relax again. As you move, remold, come down. Lift up and relax, move and remold. Lift up and relax, move and remold. Once you create a habit of doing this, the basics of moving through chords is literally going to feel much easier. But like I said, being unsure about what you're playing next can cause you to tense up as well. So all these steps really need to work together. Just a couple of quick extra tips to finish with. When you're moving from a chord that's on black keys to a chord that's on white keys, sometimes people have a habit of just kind of sliding off and dropping down onto the white keys. Make sure you don't do that. Make sure that you can still feel a nice controlled lift. It's really useful to write out a chord progression, and you can study that away from the piano to help get it in your head. Eventually, we want this to be a more subtle movement, so we want to keep our fingertips kind of close to the keys a lot of the time. So sometimes fingertips even still sort of brushing the keys, still touching them. But a good way to practice, to get used to it before you can refine it, is to exaggerate things. So you can make a bit of a bigger movement, lift, I don't know, an inch or two off the keyboard to really force you to think about how your wrist is moving. And lastly, the more familiar you are in general with playing chords, with recognizing chord positions and inversion shapes and things like that, then the easier it's going to be to learn new chord progressions. Check out some of the other videos I've linked in the description, and I have some helpful PDFs available on chords and scales available from my website. I hope that was helpful. Next, you should watch this video for some handy practice tips for anyone that struggles with fitting their hands together. Thanks for watching.